All right. So
This
first of
meeting is
all,
being recorded.
oh, interesting. So first of all, how was the hackathon this weekend? Did we learn some decent stuff there? Did we have a good experience? What's the feedback? You got nothing for me?
For myself personally, our team leader decided we were writing in React Native, so I was pretty much dead weight there.
Okay, so your team lead decided to do React Native instead of the Java Swing stuff?
Yeah, they had talked to whoever was moderating or organizing it and gotten the approval for it, but yeah.
I see. Do you know who was your team lead?
It was Andrew. Last name started with a C. I can't remember. Yeah, Chester. Yeah.
Oh, Chester. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm guessing that because his internship that he's working on, well, actually he's full-time now, is using React. He just wanted to do that rather than learn something new, which kind of sucks. But so that's a shame, because I wanted them to stick to Java stuff so it was related. And I agree, Jake. I hate anything related to UI. Well, for the next one, I'll talk to them and make sure they tighten the rules a little bit and make sure we stick with tech that it's at least in your ballpark. So, you know, you're picking up some new stuff, but it's at least in the world that you've been working in. Not that, you know, React is still JavaScript syntax. So it's not like the syntax was significantly different, but it did deviate a lot from your mindset of how you know how to program at this point. So I could see how that could feel like a waste of time. So I apologize for that. Okay, so let's do this. Sharing. All right, so let's start off by going over what's going to be on the exam. So our exam is going to be Wednesday. And what I'll do is I'll put it up on Blackboard. So for class on Wednesday, you can certainly take the exam on Wednesday during class. I will open up a Zoom meeting, so I will be online during class if you have questions or something during the exam. Otherwise, the exam can be taken anytime during the day on Wednesday. It'll be open and it'll be set to be done in 1 hour. So you will have to complete the exam in a single sitting. It'll be 10 questions. So here, I'll just create a slide for this. Exam Wednesday the 9th. We'll take 1 hour and we'll be on Blackboard. We'll open a live Zoom meeting during the normally scheduled class in case you want to take the exam during that time and want to have the ability to ask questions, etc. So effectively creating the normal, exam conditions. You can take the exam at any point on Wednesday, but it does need to be completed in 1 hour. All right, so one word of warning. We had some issues with this last year, so your work should be your own. Don't use web resources or work in teams, etc. So while I encourage you to work in groups and things like that for homework assignments to help facilitate the learning experience, I want to see what you've learned when it comes to the exams. And I can't assess that if you're working in teams on the exam. And remember, I have the policy, if you do better on the final exam than you did on your midterm, I'll replace whatever you got on the midterm with what you got on the final. So even if you bomb this exam on Wednesday, you still have an opportunity to get an A in the class. So do yourself a favor and make sure that you do your own work to give yourself an assessment of where you stand relative to where you should be. Blackboard does have some stuff that kind of keeps track of what you're doing on your computer at the time that you're taking an exam. So I get a little report if you're using the web browser and things like that. So don't do that is what I'm saying. You know, don't give me a reason I have to send, you know, an email and have to be the jerk and stuff like that. So, you know, that's not my intent, but I need to be able to assess how you're doing. So the exam is, you know, closed book, closed note, closed neighbor. You should set aside an hour to do the exam in a single sitting. With all those things in mind, when I grade it with the understanding that, you know, you're not able to test your code. So I'm not expecting necessarily perfection. I'm expecting you to show me competence, because it's pretty clear when you look at some code whether or not this person generally knows what they're doing or is completely lost. And I'm assessing along those lines. What's your competency level? You know, not did you forget a semicolon or something like that. I'm not going to go around nitpicking for stupid stuff like that, that if you were able to compile, it would have jumped out and said, oh, I need to fix this. All right, so understand that I know that you're not testing your stuff. So I don't want you to test it. I want you to give me your best shot, just kind of using your own abilities. Okay, questions about that? So make sure you work on the exam yourself. It should be your own work, not something off the internet, not something from a neighbor, yada, yada, yada. All right, so there will be 10 questions, 10 points each, all short answer, essay, programming. I don't do true, false, or multiple choice or any of that stuff. So while I haven't written the exam yet, so I don't know exactly the breakdown, you know, about half of the exam will be coding. The other half will be short answer type stuff. And some of the coding will be just like write a couple of lines that accomplishes something. And some of the other coding might be, you know, write a function that takes these things as parameters, does something, and either returns a value or displays a value or something like that, kind of proving you can do some algorithm stuff and yeah, that kind of thing. So that's what the format of the exam will be, is 10 questions, 10 points each. All right, so let me go through the slides from the beginning of the course, and I'll kind of point out areas, because this is what I'll do when I write the exam. So I'll point out the things that seem important to me that you might want to spend some extra time practicing. Let's see. I'm not going to ask you anything specific about, you know, the history of Java or anything like that. This was just our stuff that let us transition from C++ to Java, because this class is a programming class, not a Java class. Obviously, you should be able to write stuff to the screen. You should know the difference between println and print, although I doubt that would be anything that would cost you points on the exam if you have your formatting weird or something. Just that's something you should know. One kicks it down the line, the other one keeps it on the same line. You should know all the Java primitive types. I'm not going to ask you questions about like how many bits a certain one is. That's probably information that you should have in your mind at some point. That'll help you as you get further and further into computer science courses and being able to consider, well, how much memory is one thing versus another. You're probably already seeing some of that stuff in 325. But again, maybe it's an under the hood type stuff. It's important for you to know, but not something I'm necessarily going to test you on. But you should be able to use all of the primitive types, specifically int, char, double, and Boolean. Let's say those are probably going to be the ones that are going to be very, very likely represented in your solutions on the exam. I probably would not ask you any question that kind of tricked you into say, you using an int and then oh, technically the value you were storing won't fit in an int. You should have used the long -5 points or something. I won't do that. So, be able to work with integer types, character types, floating point number types, and Booleans. All right, that was just an example we did in class. I do like for programming questions on exams, I tend to write questions involving string manipulation or arrays. They just end up being convenient ways of testing kind of your algorithm ability in kind of test appropriate size coding problems. The example I might use is like, write a function that takes a string as a parameter and reverses that string and returns the result, something like that. So, I want you to show me that you understand that strings are read only. So you're going to create a new string. That's the empty string. You're going to walk through it in reverse using some sort of loop. You'll build up the new string and then ultimately return it. So a couple of things to point out there. I'm focusing on, do you know how to write a function in terms of its parameters and its return type? Do you understand the difference when I say a function returns something versus prints something? Okay, so if I say a function should return an answer, that means it should spit it out to whoever called it. If I say it should display something, then there should be a println statement inside there. So make sure you understand the difference, because you will lose points there, because that's an incompetency thing where I want to know that you understand the difference. I also understand how functions work, that if you're writing functions are generic chunks of code that you write once and then you can reuse them. So that means those parameters need to be written generically. So if you need to take in 2 integers and do something with them, you should show me that you understand how to write a function that takes in 2 separate integer parameters. Okay. But I do like asking questions involving manipulating strings. So make sure you're familiar with concatenation. Make sure you're familiar with looping through a string with its length function. I would say the char at method and the index of method for strings are probably pretty important. I commonly will ask something that will involve, you looking at a particular character in a string, or maybe determining the location of a character within a string. That doesn't mean you can't write your own function that will go and do it. If you want to write a little helper function as part of your answer, that's fine. I don't care. You're not going to lose points if you don't use one of the built-in functions. But index of is a function that I expect you to have some competency with. Index of for a string returns the first index inside the string where a character existed, or a -1 if it's not found in there. All right, so yeah, here's these common methods for strings. So basically know these guys. I probably won't ask you anything that deals with compare to on the exam. Definitely know that equals is how we compare the contents of strings, not the double equal sign. The double equal sign is comparing pointer types, the memory address. So those first 4 on there are things that you should definitely be familiar with if you're going to practice some stuff with strings. similarly what I just said, that double equal sign for strings, know the difference. I don't know if I'll specifically test you on that. Now that I'm thinking about it, I probably will. I will probably ask a question dealing with proving that you understand the difference between the double equal sign and the equals method for strings when comparing strings, because that is an important concept and it's something that is often misunderstood. And unfortunately, in modern programming, some of our newer languages fake it for us and make the double equal sign work. But Java is not one of those languages. You need to, if you want to compare the contents of strings, you need to use the dot equals method. So at the very least, show that you understand that comparing pointers, memory addresses, is different than comparing the contents of a string. Okay, so that's what those slides were about. We talked about the character class. This, I'm not going to probably ask you anything dealing specifically with the character class. If I want you to use a specific method, I might say, okay, there exists a method in the character class called toUpperCase. I might give you something that looks like this, you know, as opposed to me. I'm not expecting you to have memorized chunks of code. Outside of, like, you should know that strings have a length method and a char@, method. Those are things I probably won't give you. But if there's something very specific, even something like this, where we're not using the character class that much, I might give you some documentation like this and expect you to be able to call it. In fact, I think there probably will be a question where I give you some kind of documentation. It might be even a made up method. I might say, assuming there's a class called ABC that has a static method that looks like this. Show me how you might call that method on this input, something like that, proving that you understand how to read some documentation. You understand the consequences of having something static versus non-static in terms of how you use it. Make sure you understand what the parameters are and how to call it appropriately and stuff like that. Okay, but I'm not asking you to like go and memorize kind of less commonly used things that we maybe had happened to do in class. I'll give you that stuff. Same thing, toUpperCase. You should maybe know what exists with strings, but I won't ask you to use that for a string class. Definitely understand this slide, static versus non-static. Super important, basically unlocks the your ability to read documentation. I will certainly have some questions on this exam dealing with your ability to read documentation. I would say there's a small chance I might, if I need a throwaway question, you know, something that's relatively short and sweet, I could ask something dealing with polymorphism. It's one of those fun words, but I'm not sure that I would ask, you know, it doesn't necessarily measure your competency all that much, other than the fact that you should be aware that you can have more than one method with the same name that takes a different number in or type of parameters. It's not necessarily that important that you know what that's called, just that you should know that that exists. And I'm not sure how I'd really ask that on an exam. So I would call it a low chance at this, but you probably should be familiar with polymorphism. It's a good computer science trivia term. You know, as we start getting into our mud stuff, you know, definitely be able to write your own objects. So I might say create a class that keeps track of these two different kinds of attributes and write an appropriate constructor and getters and setters, whatever. Be able to translate that question, that kind of word problem, into a solution. You know, so just because we happen to write objects like rooms and exits and things like that, you know, I'm probably not going to ask you anything specific about like the stuff from our mud, because I'm going to ask you more of programming competency questions. But I might say, create a class called something that takes 3 inputs, a string and 2 integers or something, and create 2 instances of that class showing that you know how to use it or something like that. Like I said earlier, a lot of the programming questions I ask on exams tend to deal with strings or arrays or objects. So make sure you're familiar with arrays, that arrays in Java are able to advertise their own length. And remember, it's a length field, not a length method. So there's not opening, closing parentheses on the length of an array, although I probably wouldn't take off points for that as long as you understand that arrays can advertise their length. Definitely understand arrays are stored in contiguous memory and kind of what that means. I don't know if I'll ask a question about that, but that would be another one of those, kind of quick. That would be one of those half the questions are more short answer. So I might say, what does contiguous memory mean and why do arrays use it or something along those lines. You should understand generics along with array lists. I will probably ask a question that either shows you some code that uses array lists with generics or asks you to write something. So when we built array lists, the default array list only holds objects. And if we want to have things come out as either, like, for instance, our rooms or our exits or things like that, we needed to use those little angle bracket things for generics. I would think it's much more likely that I give you some code and say, what does this do? And that has generics in it, rather than me giving you a problem that requires you to solve it using generics. And that has more to do with kind of the size of question that I can ask on a short exam. It's not that you shouldn't be able to do it. It's that I kind of need to stick to those more drill-like questions dealing with, strings, arrays, or, array lists of strings, maybe something like that. And I'm not going to really be testing on, technically it comes out as a generic object. I want to know more about your ability to, like, spin through every element of an array list, understand that the number of elements in an array list is its size, that kind of stuff. Instance of operator, I'll probably have something on the exam dealing with that. So you should know what that is and what it's used for, and either be able to read code that does it, or maybe write a little, if statement. Like maybe I might say, write some code that, write a function that takes an object in as a parameter. And if that is an instance of the player class, print out one thing. If it's a instance of the car class, print out something else, something like that, proving that you understand how to use instance of. I could ask I probably wouldn't have you write anything with exceptions on the exam, but asking something about the purpose of exceptions. What does it allow us to accomplish? So this is what that try catch code. So I might show you some code that uses try catches and ask you what this accomplishes. But kind of that idea of handling errors in your program gracefully instead of the program just crashing. Won't ask anything about JSON. Definitely inheritance will be on there in some format. This idea where we decided that there's this, like, generic inhabitant in our world. And then those, out of that inhabitant, we have 2 different flavors of inhabitants. We have players and we have monsters. And in our example, we had players were kind of human controlled and monsters are computer controlled. And we just started talking about threads last class and how we're going to do something with that. We'll start that a little bit today if we have some time. We'll see when we're done talking about this. But in any case, I wouldn't ask something specific about our mud. So I won't, like, you won't have to go and study all the code that we've written for the mud, so that if I ask you some weird question of how did we implement XYZ in the room class of our mud, I'm not going to ask you questions like that. You know, I want you to understand the stuff that we did from a programming fundamental perspective, but I would ask it more generically as opposed to something about our specific thing we've done in class for the mud we're building. Okay, so inheritance will definitely be on there one way or another. Definitely know the difference between the this keyword and the super keyword, and kind of maybe how that works. Similarly, the TOString method for classes, understand that I don't know how I'd ask it, but this really is more of an inheritance question, how like the generic object class provides for us this method called TOString that gives us the weird memory address looking output. And because that is guaranteed to exist for all objects, since all objects at some level inherit from object, that's why the println method works for generic objects. And in the worst case, will print out memory address. We can choose to override that method in our own classes by writing TOString and then have it do something other than display a memory or return a string that's the memory address. We could have it return whatever we want, as long as it's in the format of a string. So kind of understand that concept of inheritance. I think that'll be probably good enough. I won't ask you something so specific as like the TOString method, but it'll be something where if I give you some scenario where there's a parent class that does something, and then a couple child classes, understand how the flow of things goes between those. So definitely know about the this keyword and the super keyword. Similarly, the abstract keyword, where we're creating a class specifically to support inheritance, where we have no intention to ever creating an instance of that class itself. So in our case, we made the inhabitant class, we made it abstract, because we never actually are going to create an instance of inhabitant. Instead, we're going to create instances of players or monsters, which are inhabitants. An inhabitant, that class only exists to provide the commonalities that are shared between players and monsters. But we specifically flag it as being abstract because we do not want to allow somebody to create instances of it. All right, so understand the abstract keyword. Definitely understand interfaces. We really haven't, I mean, we talked about them last class in terms of how they relate to threads and how the threads follow the runnable interface. They implement the runnable interface, which effectively says you must write this public void run method. We haven't really done anything though specifically with interfaces, so I don't know how I would ask a question dealing with them on the exam. So I would say pretty low risk of interfaces making an appearance on this test. You should still understand the concept, but I don't think it's something I'm going to test you on yet. Similarly with threads, if threads are on the exam, it'll be fairly like a light version of threads. I probably wouldn't ask you to write any code dealing with threads. I might give you something or ask you a question about threads or something, but even then I would think since we've just started messing with it, that might be more of a final exam type question, especially when we get into the Unity stuff, where we are talking about things happening at the same time much more commonly. So be aware of threads just in case there's a name drop on the exam somewhere, but it's not something I'm going to expect you to problem solve with on the exam. Okay, so questions about any of that? Or questions about the exam or anything you want me to review ahead of the exam on Wednesday? Nothing? Okay. Well, so again, so we will not officially have class on Wednesday, but sometime during the day on Wednesday, make sure you do the exam. Like I said, I will meet at our normal class time in a Zoom session on Wednesday. So I will open up the Zoom class and I will be sitting in there. So if you choose to take your exam at the same time as our class time, you can certainly do that and kind of, attend class so that if you do have a question during the exam, I will be available live to answer that question. All right, so feel free to take advantage of that. Otherwise, you do you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The tech talk tomorrow, is that, so it starts at 6, and how long do you think that goes till?
Well, we schedule it 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I would say historically they have not gone that long. I would say that, maybe it'll go like 6 to 7 for the actual presentation. And then there's kind of like, opportunities to ask them questions. Students will ask about internships, stuff like that afterwards. So I don't care if you, well, I do care. I want you to stay and ask questions and participate and stuff, but really I want you to learn about these companies because these companies are some of our biggest internship folks. So there's a reasonable chance some of you are going to be working for these companies. I want you to hear what they have to say and stuff like that. But that's kind of what you can plan on. It's probably going to be about an hour of actual content.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Since that's on Zoom, do you want us to just take like a screenshot of us attending it?
Yeah, that's fine. Just anything that kind of proves you were there.
Okay.
I'm not being overly picky here. It's more of don't just blow it off. Be there, take your screenshot, whatever. Because my preference is that you attend the tech talk, not write the essay. Is the punchline. All right, and then like I said earlier, and if you feel like you want to give me some additional feedback with the hackathons, but you didn't want to say it in class, feel free to send me an email or a private message because I want these external events that we're requiring. I don't want them to be wastes of time. Because I'm not a busy work type of professor. So, if you feel like you showed up on Saturday just because you had to and didn't get anything out of it, I want to know that. I want to know kind of why or how things could have been different so you felt like you could get something out of it. So like as an example, that was good feedback that like one of the teams chose a technology that maybe the team lead was more familiar with, but that kind of defeats the purpose. Because that team lead is still a senior and, he doesn't know everything either. So he probably should have taken advantage of having to dig in with everybody else and learn the new technology using the skills that he's done. So I think a mistake was made by, telling them that, oh yeah, you can use React because that, deviated from, I think, the goals of the hackathon. So I apologize for that, but I do want to hear that if other things like that happen, so I can try to make the experience better next time. Because I'm not trying to just punish you and saying you have to show up to XYZ just because. All right, I want them to be decent uses of your time. So please do feel free to send me messages regarding that so I can try to make the next one a better experience. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, with only 7 minutes left, it's not going to do us much good to dive back into strings for 7 minutes, threads rather, for 7 minutes. So what we'll do, so kind of the plan for the rest of, I guess, the next, this week. So next class, we'll have the exam. I'll grade it by Friday. We'll go over the exam in class on Friday. Depending on how long that takes, I then might spend a little more time on our, activating our rat to kind of move around. The goal is to kind of have that be the finishing point for the Java portion of the class. So whether that flows a little bit into the after spring break, because remember next week is spring break, so we won't meet next week. So possibly right after spring break, we might spend 1 or 2 class periods finishing up that, having the rat move around thing. And then we're going to transition to Unity. So if you wanted to kind of get some stuff going, it's Unity, I think it's unity.com, or is it unity.org? Yeah, unity.com, this guy. And then you can go ahead and, download it for your platform and make sure you have it all updated and stuff like that. So, we'll kind of do like a tutorial with Unity. Unity is a game engine that has a lot of the, so kind of like you guys just at this hackathon did some user interface stuff, and hopefully you hated it as much as I do. It has more to do with graphical talent than anything else for me. So I'm envious of those of you who have graphical ability and can make interfaces look good. But one of the skills I might say is that a computer programmer typically is good at like making things work, not necessarily making things look good. Now, having said that, the idea of, you think of a video game, it doesn't all have to be video games. You can also do a lot of experiences and stuff. But Unity is made for creating 3D, let's call it games, but 3D software applications. And that can be for a flat screen computer, or it can be for VR. So the skills we'll be learning are going to be the same, whether you're writing a video game for, writing your own version of Call of Duty or something, or whether you're writing a virtual reality game. The only difference between a normal game and a VR thing is the camera. You swap out the normal camera that kind of sits above the person's head and follows them around as they're going, with the Steam VR camera rig, which automatically does the magic of tracking the headset, tracking the hand controllers, that kind of stuff. And the only thing you need to change as the programmer is, I'm not using keyboard and mouse necessarily. Now I'm using these controller thingies that have 5 or 6 buttons on them. And what do I want to happen when this button is clicked and this button is clicked? So whether it's a movable controller, or it's a left mouse click, or it's an Xbox controller with you're pressing the X key or something, you're programming the same. There's not like some kind of special version of, things you do for VR. Your inputs and output, your inputs are just different, or potentially different. All right, so our skills we'll be learning in Unity will be transferable to the whole gambit of writing 3D applications. All right, so we'll start off with kind of more tutorial stuff just to get the basics of Unity down, but we're not going to spend tons of time learning how to make things look really good in Unity. Part of that is because I don't have that ability, but so we'll have a lot of boxes moving around the screen and stuff like that. But if you want to take it a step further and have cooler looking things, you can certainly do that. But if you wanted to play with this ahead of time, go ahead and download Unity from unity.com, and you can start looking at some tutorials and things like that. Okay. Any questions about what's happening kind of moving forward here in the next couple of weeks? Okay, well, I will see hopefully some of you on Wednesday. I guess it's possible I might sit in the Zoom room alone, but whatever. So make sure you take the exam sometime during the day on Wednesday. I'll get it graded on Thursday, and then we'll go over it in class on Friday. All right, I will see everybody on Friday at least.
Thanks, Lemon.
Yep, take care.